Genesis chapter 3. Let's turn there. All right, very good. Genesis chapter 3. We're going to read verses 1 through 7. Deception is a tool that the devil uses against us in the battle of temptation. How many of you have ever struggled with temptation before?
Amen.
Have you ever given into temptation before?
Amen.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm preaching to the right church. The right people. All right, good. Well, we're on the same page. What I want to do tonight is I want to look at deception, and I've called this sermon "The Anatomy of Deception." What I want to try to do is break deception down and describe its various parts and what makes it so effective against us, and what is it that comes alongside deception to tighten its grip on us. Since deception is a huge element of temptation, if we can understand deception properly, then we're going to have more victory against temptation, which is the goal. As we get older in Christ, the goal is more victory over temptation and not less. So let's look at the anatomy of deception. We'll read verses 1 through 7 of Genesis 3. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die." Then the serpent said to the woman, "You'll not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. Let's start by taking a deeper look into deception. The general idea of deception is, do I have this mic on?
No. We barely hear.
I know.
It says it's on. Oh, there we go. Oh,
That's better.
has to be unmuted. Is like, am I talking to myself? I can't even hear myself talk, which is not a bad thing. Okay, so deception. To define deception is to mislead by a false appearance or statement, to falsely persuade others, or to cause someone to believe something that is not true, typically in order to gain some personal advantage. So in our text, it's fascinating because Eve is responding to the serpent in verse 2 and says, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die." So she's not declaring that this is what her husband said. Right? She's not saying, well, my husband told me that God said. In other words, in her mind, it's very clear what God has said. She states that God has said. There's no doubt in her mind that this is the commandment from God. So here's my question. How in the world does this woman with 100% brain capacity, right? Scientists tell us that we use between 3 and 7% of our brains. Right? She had 100%. She was a brilliant woman. Right? The question was not about intelligence. She was probably the most intelligent woman that has ever lived. She had the capacity to use every part and aspect of her brain it was all at her disposal. Unlike us, most of us, we're trying to function on 3%. And we do all right, and some of us are smarter, and you guys use 7%, but, I'm probably at 1.5%, if I'll be honest. And so, can you imagine, this woman is functioning at 100% brain capacity. She lives in paradise, right? With everything that she needs at her disposal. She knows what God has said. How does this woman, with 100% brain capacity, living in absolute paradise with all the needs that she has at her disposal, how does she fall into transgression? Like, you would think she could just intelligently see right through what the devil was saying, right? What the serpent was saying. You would think she could use all of her brain intelligence and she's got everything she needs. She doesn't need anything else. So you would think. So how in the world does she do it? The Apostle Paul tells us in Timothy that Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. So what we find is that the reason why this woman with 100% brain capacity fell into transgression was because of deception.
Amen.
All right. So now, if deception is that powerful that it could take out this woman, then we better be weary of deception ourselves. That means that all of us can be deceived a lot of times, at any time, and we could be functioning. Sometimes we're living under deception. We don't even know it. Sometimes we're going through life and we think we're right. We think that everything we're seeing is clear, but we're actually living under deception. So as soon as you can identify deception and you snap out of it, you go, how was I deceived? Like, how in the world did that get pulled over on me? Like, seriously, you're looking back and you're saying, I can't even believe I fell for that. Well, deception is so powerful that it could take out the most brilliant, intelligent woman that ever lived. So we must also guard ourselves against deception. Now, I want you to table that thought for a minute, and I want to go to the scientific side of things for a couple of minutes. And I want you to talk to you about how the brain functions, or how science tells us the brain functions, because I believe that it's relevant to the conversation of deception and what makes it so effective. So the human brain is approximately 1.3 kilograms. It contains about 100 billion neurons, and the brain is the command center of everything you think and feel and do. It's divided into two halves, or hemispheres, and they're connected by the corpus callosum. This is very important. Within each half, particular regions control certain functions. They figured this out by doing what's called an fMRI, or a functional MRI, which means that they can strap something to your head, a scanner to your head, while you're doing stuff or while you're seeing stuff, and they can see which parts of your brain are lighting up under the MRI. It's called a functional MRI because you're functioning. You're not just sitting there, but you're functioning. You're doing something, and while you're doing it, you have to solve a math problem. They can see which part of your brain lights up for the math problem. They give you questions that are related to language, and they can see which part of your brain lights up. So they've learned that different parts of your brain control certain functions of your life, of what you do. There's a number of myths about the brain. Namely, the myth that goes that you are either right brain dominated or left brain dominated. That is evidently a myth. There's a team of neuroscientists who spent 2 years analyzing to see if we are dominant one side or the other. Listen to what the study concluded. Magnetic resonance of imaging of 1,000 people revealed that the human brain doesn't actually favor one side over the other. The networks on one side aren't generally stronger than the networks on the other side. Although the two sides function differently, they work together and complement each other. You don't use only one side of your brain at a time. Whether you are performing a logical or a creative function, you are receiving input from both sides of your brain. Now, some of us choose to use one side of our brain more than we choose to use the other, but we are not physically, that's what they're saying, physically, you don't have a stronger this side than that side. You might be lazily falling to that side and only using one side of your brain, but physically the neurons are not stronger on one side in one person than they are on the other side. That's what science has let us know. They've discovered that the left side of the brain tends to control aspects of language and logic. The right side of the brain tends to handle spatial information, visual comprehension. So I've got a chart that they're going to put up for you, and I want to kind of show you how this works when we get to it. Almost there. Yes, right there. Okay. So the left side of your brain, the logical hemisphere, is where language happens, right? When you're speaking, when you're comprehending language, they've discovered the left side of your brain is lighting up, a specific part of your left side of your brain. Numbers, math, right? Analytical thinking, facts, logic. It all takes place in the left side of your brain. When you're hearing facts, you're speaking logically. It's all this side under the functional MRI that's lighting up, right? Now the right side of your brain is what they call the creative hemisphere. It is where expression comes from, intuition, emotional intelligence, or imagination, or visualization. That all comes from the right side of your brain. So, what they've discovered is, in order for healthy thinking, you have to use both sides of your brain. That corpus callosum is very important. In other words, when you're using language, it's not just the left side of your brain. The left side of your brain needs the right side of your brain in order to think healthy about language. For instance, when you're learning a language, right, you can learn the vocabulary, which would be the left side of your brain. But if you can't read expressions from people or hear the language intonation, right, how it drops or how it picks up, or if you can't read expressions, which happens in the right side of your brain, then nobody's going to understand you, and you're not really going to understand what's being said. You can be saying words but not really being able to speak. There's a big difference. If you can't understand context or tone, then you're not going to be able to actually communicate. You know, there's a big difference between speaking a language and communicating a language. When I was learning French, I could learn a lot of vocabulary, but it's the way you say the words or the way you don't say the words. It's the ability to read somebody's expression, to use emotional intelligence, which is the right side of your brain, that makes the language part on the left side of your brain make sense. Now you're communicating. If you're only using the left side of your brain, you might be able to say words and get by with things, but you'll be horrible in conversation. Because they'll be using expressions and tones, and you'll be completely blind to what's happening in the communication. The same thing is true with mathematical equations. Right? So what they've discovered is you're doing a mathematical equation. While you're looking at the numbers, the left side of your brain is lighting up a lot, but what happens is they see parts of the right side of your brain lighting up at the same time. Not as heavy, but they're still lighting up. Here's what they do. The left side of your brain is calculating. That's where the numbers are coming from. The right side of your brain, which is that side that can see the bigger picture, the comparisons or the rough estimations, right? It's the imagination. So the right side of your brain thinks it's probably going to be X. And the left side of your brain is calculating it, and when there's an agreement, you go, yeah, I think I got that right. But when the right side of your brain says, I think it should be 872, but the left side of your brain, you've calculated it out and it's 500, you're like, something's not right about this. Right? So in order to be effective in math, you want both sides of the brain functioning. The right side's estimating what it should be, and the left kind of agrees. When there's agreement, you're like, yeah, I think that's pretty much right. If you don't use the other side. So now, let's bring that understanding of how our brain functions back to our text to try to understand deception a little bit better. Because I believe that what happens in deception is that we have to ignore one side of our brain. We have to shut down one side of our brain. So Eve, with the left side of her brain, understands the truth, the logic, the fact. You can put that chart back up. The logic, the fact of what God said. She understands it. She can repeat it back. There is logic in what she's saying. She's able to repeat it back to the serpent. It's very clear to her. But once the deception is introduced into the equation, it's like the right side of the brain takes over and the left side shuts down. It's fascinating. She no longer is thinking analytically. She's not thinking about the facts of what God has said. She's not thinking logically anymore. She's not dwelling in the truth. She begins to allow the emotional and visual and imaginative side of her brain to take over. all of a sudden she's beginning to imagine what it would be like to eat this fascinating fruit. Now remember, the left side of her brain is saying, God has said, this is fact, this is logic, this is truth. The right side of her brain's going, oh, I wonder what that fruit tastes like. The imagination is taking over. Oh, I bet you it feels good in your hand. I bet you. Meanwhile, the left side of her brain is probably trying to scream at her. What are you talking about? Stop. God has said. Facts, truth, logic. She's shutting it down. On the right side of her brain, her imagination, her emotions of what it must taste like, all of her senses are going wild. The right side of her brain is going wild, and she's numbing or quieting or making the left side of her brain shut up. I'm trying to enjoy what the imagination is doing. I'm trying to imagine what this is. This is enjoyable. This is fun. This could be exciting. Could I have my own garden? Could I make my own creation if I eat the fruit? Could I? Oh, what would I create if I could create? All of a sudden, the imagination is taking over. Will I really die? What would death feel like? Would that be good or would that be bad? What is death? All of a sudden, the imagination is going crazy, and she's no longer listening to the fact and logic and truth. It's like she's shut down the left side of her brain completely. 1 minute, the serpent asks her, and it's God has said. It's all facts, it's all logic, it's all left side of the brain. But as soon as he introduces deception, no more facts, there's no more mention of what God has said, there's no more mention of the truth, there's no more mention of the logic. All of a sudden, the right side of the brain takes over. And she's feeling it now. She's seeing it now. No need to think through this logically. No need to think about the truth. I'm just going to feel it. It's fascinating how much a culture today stimulates and trains the right side of the brain. Mm-hmm. You know what we do with our children sometimes? We give them digital babysitters. Mm-hmm. Here, just quiet and watch this iPad. Just watch the show. Watch the cartoon. Sit in front of the television. Play this game. Everything digital, it's visual, right? It's stimulating the right side of the brain. Because you just sit there and you watch. It just comes in. You're just absorbing. You're using the visual, imaginative side of your brain. There's no reading. You know what they're teaching in schools today? That there's no absolute truth. What is truth? Truth is nonsense. It's whatever you want it to be. That's the right side of the brain. I just imagine my truth and then I live my truth. Right? That's all the right. Everything today is training and stimulating the right side of the brain. We're ignoring the left side of the brain. Don't think this through logically. Don't think this through rationally. Put truth to the side. Just visualize world peace. Just imagine it. Just imagine what it would look like. Isn't it great? I was in London a couple of months back. And while I'm there, I went downtown, and they had this environmental parade where they're all marching. They got all these students to get out of school, and they're all marching about cleaning up our planet and how everybody's destroying our planet. I mean, and they're upset, man. They're marching with signs, and they're just like, clean up our planet, man. And what's wrong with you stupid money people? You just want, you're making our planet dirty, and the whales are eating all your stupid straws, and, they're all mad, and they're it's like angry time, and they got these chants about the prime minister, keep our planet clean. And so I'm watching this, and I'm just standing back, right? And I'm just watching this anger. It's a lot of anger. And they're mad at everybody and, whatever. And I'm watching, and as the parade goes by, I'm looking down on the ground. There's orange peels everywhere. There are plastic bottles that they have just drank water from and threw on the ground. There's trash everywhere. There's trash everywhere. Wherever the parade went, there was trash. They're all sitting around, like, in between their parade thing, and they're eating, they're throwing stuff on the floor. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, you're all emotional, like, yeah, visualize a clean planet, yeah. But you can't even clean up your own stuff. I'm like, your room is dirty, dude. Your bedroom hasn't been cleaned for 3 years, and you want us to clean up your planet. Like, you have a dirty, you're throwing stuff all over. There's a mess Everywhere these clean the planet people are, there's a mess everywhere. You're not thinking logically about this. Why don't you start cleaning up your own square space first, and then we'll talk about cleaning up the world. You can't even clean. No. I don't need to think about my space. I need to think about everybody else's space. I need to think about those whales out there and those dolphins that are eating your straws and dying. But meanwhile, I'm not thinking logically or rationally or truthfully about this. Right here, right now, this doesn't mean anything. The truth right here, that I'm making a mess everywhere I go, means nothing. It's all about imagining and visualizing. We have a whole generation who has been trained to stimulate only the right side of their brain. Just feel your way through life. Whatever feels good, just do it. Don't worry about truth. Don't worry about facts. Don't sit there and try to calculate things. No. Just imagine it, feel it, and do it. You know, they say reading is one of the greatest exercises for your brain because it makes both sides of your brain work together. You have to study in logic, and you have to imagine what he's saying, and you have to go back and read it and comprehend it. You have to analyze things. Your brain, it's using both sides. We're not teaching people to read anymore. I mean, every book is on tape now. You know, you just listen to it. You know, it's not have to read it anymore. There's something about seeing the words and trying to process them and then imagining it and thinking through a thought that somebody else has already thought, and we're not teaching our kids that anymore. Here, just sit down and listen to this and watch this, and you'll be fine. You'll get it. You'll be trained by this. Just whatever we teach you is good. It's perfect. It's truth. Don't think about it. Don't be logical about it. You know, it's interesting to imagine, it's interesting how much the world is willing to pay for to be a participant in deception. We love being deceived. Anybody here like magicians? Come on, don't lie just because I'm preaching on deception. I love watching magicians do their trick. I'm like asking them to deceive me. That's what I'm doing, right? Like, hey, deceive me. This will be cool. You know? Right? But what is almost all of Hollywood based on? Deception. You do know that men can't climb walls, right? And shoot webs out of their wrists. Like, you do know that, like, Superman can't really fly. Like, it's all, like, we sit there and we pay big dollars to go watch a movie to be deceived. Amen. Cars can't fly from the top of one building to the top of another building. It just doesn't work that way. But we're sitting there like, deceive me, deceive me, deceive me. I'll pay you to deceive me. Hollywood is the art of deception. It stimulates the deception element in our lives, and we love it. We pay for it. We know that 90% of the movie is humanly not possible. Amen. But what do? We go in there, we watch it, whatever it is, we shut down the left side of our brain, and we just let the right side run wild. Because if you're using the left side of your brain, like people who really have the left side of their brain exercised a lot, they can't watch a whole bunch of stuff that's being put out. Because the whole time they're going, you can't really do that. That's stupid. Like, men don't fly. Like, hello. Like, in order to accept that and enjoy that, you have to shut down the left side of your brain. You really do. And if you're functioning with the left side of your brain, it's like, this is boring, whatever. It's not even, this is garbage. And you might enjoy documentaries or, History Channel, stuff that, is more logical and truth and fact-based. But you can't live in this Hollywood world if you're functioning with the left side of your brain because you're sitting there the whole time like, that's not possible, dude. Cars don't really go up on the side like this and come back down. Like, it just doesn't do it, What are the tools of deception, right? Here's my question. What are the tools that deception requires from you to be effective? Because here's what happens, is if deception is going to be effective, you have to give deception some tools to work with. Deception can't just take you out. You have to surrender things to deception. You have to choose to be deceived. Effective deception begins to lay hold of our hearts when we change and adjust the truth. You start playing with the truth, you're opening yourself to deception. When God first spoke to Adam, in chapter 2 of Genesis, verse 16 and 17. And God himself declared, here's his words about the tree. God said, you shall not eat. That's what God said. But by the time it gets to Eve, the truth has been played with. Now, I don't know if it was played with between Adam, from what God gave Adam to what Adam gave Eve, or if it was Eve's imagination that added things, but there's stuff added to the truth. Mm-hmm. She doesn't say, you shall not eat it. She says, you shall not eat it or touch it. Mm-hmm. God didn't say anything about touching it when he delivered the message to Adam. Mm-hmm. Why is it now about touching it? Like, what did touching have to do? Where did you get that from? She's playing with the truth. Whether she played with it or Adam played with it, one of them, whoever played with the truth, is the one that opened the door to deception. Mm-hmm. That all of a sudden, you're playing with it and you're opening yourself to compromise. It's fascinating to me how religious people are always adding to the law.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? They're adding to the truth. Like, God gave 10 commandments, and by the time Jesus comes, there's 613 of them. Listen, you start playing with the truth, man, and you're opening yourself to deception. Even if you keep the same truth, but you just add to it, which is what Eve did. She still said, don't eat it, but she also added, don't touch it. Any sort of playing with the truth is the truth. Just deliver the truth. You start playing with the truth, either way, and you're opening yourself to deception. Another reality is that effective deception requires a developing desire inside of you. It's dangerous when you begin to set your heart on something that is forbidden. James 1:14 says, each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Not somebody else's desires, your desires. They're yours. They belong to you. You are desiring something that is forbidden, and that is how temptation grabs hold of us. When you begin desiring something that is forbidden, you are setting your mind, your cravings, you're beginning to long for something that is forbidden. And we're drawn away by our own desires. What happens is the devil simply taps into something that's already developing inside of us. Yes. He can't create something. Can you think about how this, let me get to that in a minute. 1 John tells us, do not love the world or the things in the world. The word love means to be fond of, or do not entertain, or do not welcome the things of this world. The devil begins to work his deception in the arena of your desires. How can the devil tempt you by something you don't want? Right? I mean, that's just logical. Let's just use the left side of our brain for a minute. He's not going to come to you. If you don't have a problem with stealing, right? Like, if you're not a thief, he's not going to come to you day after day and like tempting you to steal something. It doesn't even appeal to you. Like, it doesn't. Like, there's nothing in you that wants to steal. So what is he gonna? Why would he even mess with that? He's gonna find out what your weakness is, what you are desiring, and then he's gonna tap into it. Right? It's like a fisherman, right? If you're a fisherman and you go to a place and there's no fish, like you're throwing your stuff down, you're not catching any fish, you're not going to stay there very long. You're going to move on. But if you find a place where the fish are biting and you're pulling them up into your boat, you're going to stay there all day long, right? Because the fish are biting. That's what the devil does. He finds the arena of your heart that you're biting at, things that you are wanting, things that you are desiring, and then he formulates or forms a temptation based on what you are desiring. Not based on what your neighbor's desiring, or your spouse is desiring, or your kids are desiring, or your parents, based on what you are desiring. What are you setting your mind to? What are you setting your heart to? What are you starting to desire? And then he's going to create a temptation to simply tap into that. When we begin to set our hearts on something, our desires begin to grow. James 1, right after what we just read in verse 14, is 15, where he says, then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. This is fascinating. Sin, the word sin means to miss the mark or to wander from the path of uprightness and honor. So literally, it begins to divert you from God's path for your life. So imagine this. You're going down God's path for your life, and a desire starts happening, and you start to look over here, and you start to see this desire. And when you long for that desire, when you start setting your heart on it, what happens is you leave the path of